The Cragg coiners were a group of violent, ruthless criminals who were famed for their counterfeiting. Now, despite them being, as I said, violent and ruthless criminals, they have attracted a bit of a fan base, which is mystifying and mildly disconcerting. But anyway, roll the intro.
Churches, banners, kings and queens, factories and big machines, castles, forts and in-betweens are stories that are told.
Let me take you to the Calder Valley. It's a fairly green area compared to the cities nearby, Bradford, Huddersfield, Rochdale, and it's filled with small villages like Hebden Bridge, Mytholmroyd and Todmorden. It was a birthplace of Ted Hughes and the burial place of Sylvia Plath, so it's become a bit of a hotspot for the hipsters and arty types. But in the 18th century, it was just another valley in Yorkshire reliant on the wool industry. Like Saltaire, the Calder Valley mostly produced worsted, which is a type of tough, hard-wearing wool used a lot in military uniforms. After the 7 Years' War, there was an economic recession, meaning there was much less demand for worsted, and so people were struggling to get by. Now, how did the inhabitants of the valley decide to deal with these economic difficulties?
The secret ingredient is crime.
Led by a man named David King Hartley, they would clip off the edges of coins, then melt down the clippings to create new coins. Incidentally, this is why coins have those little ridges on the edges. It's to stop exactly that. They were invented actually by Isaac Newton, because then you can tell who's tried to clip them off, because the ridges will have disappeared. But anyway, coiners all over England were counterfeiting French, Spanish and Portuguese coins because, astonishingly, they were actually legal tender in England. The Cragg Valley coiners were specifically counterfeiting Portuguese moidores, which were worth 27 shillings each, which was quite a lot in those days. Their geographical position aided them immensely. They were simultaneously quite cut off from everyone else and so had a lot of countryside to hide in, whilst also being quite close to local trading hubs like Halifax and Bradford where they could distribute their coins. Rumours had circulated for a while in local newspapers that there was a gang of counterfeiters operating in the area, and soon the authorities caught wind of it. They'd sent over quite a few inspectors, but in 1769 they sent over William Dighton to investigate. A coiner named James Broadbent then betrayed his fellow coiners and turned them into the authorities, and in September and October that year, quite a few of them were arrested, including Hartley himself. Naturally, this made the coiners rather angry. Hartley's brother Isaac plotted to have Dighton killed, and one night in November he hired a group of men to ambush him outside of a pub in Halifax. They shot him and stamped on him, and after he died you could still see the boot marks on his body. Charles Watson Wentworth, who was once Prime Minister and had been born and raised in Wentworth Woodhouse near Rotherham, was tasked with capturing the coiners. He had 30 of them arrested by Christmas Day that year. In 1770, David Hartley was hanged at Tyburn near York, and many others would follow. However, others were acquitted, and some were even transported to Africa. Isaac Hartley, who had orchestrated Dighton's murder, got away scot-free and died naturally in 1815. In 1771, whilst in a pub one night in Halifax, a man named Abraham Ingham was talking about how he knew who killed Dighton. Unfortunately, he happened to be overheard by some of the coiners, who killed him by throwing him onto the fire and pouring hot coals down his breeches, which is not a nice way to go. I'm really not selling the pubs well in Halifax, am I? By the time the last coiner was hanged in 1783, there were 86 arrests in the gang. This wasn't just a tiny backroom affair, this was a huge criminal operation which spanned the area and involved a lot of compliance and turning of blind eyes in the local community. So how should we evaluate the Cragg Vale coiners? Well, they were undoubtedly a gang of ruthless, bloodthirsty criminals who murdered at least 2 people in cold blood to protect their activities. And whilst yes, it was a difficult economic situation at the time, it in no way justifies the vast scale of their operations and the lengths they were willing to go to protect what they were doing. I hope you've enjoyed this video, I hope you've learnt something new, and I hope to see you again soon.